Our next panelist is Mrs. Madhura Mitra, a climate change professional who worked as a director with PricewaterhouseCoopers Private Limited. She is an electrical engineer, a certified energy auditor by Bureau of Energy Efficiency India, and a postgraduate in energy management from IISWM Kolkata. She has more than 12 years of experience in designing climate change mitigation and adaptation policies and programs across the sectors like energy, waste, transport, mining, agriculture, and water. She has led projects in India, South Asia, and Southeast Asian region, specific islands, countries like Africa also. She has extensively engaged with ministries, regulators, public sectors, utilities, bilateral and multilateral agencies such as United Nations Development Programme, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, GIZ, etc. She focused on gender mainstreaming in climate change mitigation and adaptation policies and programs. She is uh, currently leading the National Adaptation Fund for Climate Change project in Jharkhand, India. And as a part of it, she is looking at designing gender inclusive climate resilience livelihood practices for forest and agriculture dependent communities. Now, I would like to request Mrs. Madhura Mitra to deliver her address. And for all the participants, I would like to request to write your queries if you have any to the other panelists also, so that we can raise their questions. Since we have shortage of time, we will forward your question to them, and we will intimate with you with a email in the later on. So, and one or two questions we may definitely take after this lecture. Okay, so over to Madhura.
Thank you, Professor Shengusto. And just like Hoymanti mentioned, I'm very happy to see, especially BKC sir here, because I'm seeing him after a very long time. And also Shalvani ma'am, I don't know whether she remembers me or not, but I have been a student of hers as well. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good to be back. I have a short presentation, so I will present it. I hope you can see my screen. So basically, today, when we are talking about opportunities for women in the renewable energy sector, I have divided that particular, I have tried to broaden it a little bit. So I will cover, first of all, the opportunities, the challenges and opportunities for women or for across all genders at the workplace, number one. Then I will cover, because I specifically work for the last 12 years, I'm working in the space of climate resilience that covers both climate change mitigation and adaptation. I will try to cover, how we can include, or the gender perspective into climate resilient programs. So, uh, so at workplace, so we were talking about job opportunities. So, but once we get a job, what happens? Um, because once we get a job, as a woman, we need promotion, we need equal salaries like our men colleagues and all. So how do we ensure all these things? So first of all, we need to recognize that when we talk about gender, it's not about only men or women. It's also about a third gender, which is LGBTQ plus, which is a third gender that we are considering nowadays at the workplace. So when we talk about inclusion of gender at the workplace, we are trying to say that it has to be equal, inclusive, safe workspace for both men and women, acknowledging, knowing, and including the third gender, which is LGBTQ plus, which is not, beyond men and women. And then once we have equal and safe space for all these three genders, how we can build an equal, inclusive, safe workplace for all of them. So it's what to start with two genders, then acknowledging the third gender, and then to see how we can have an equal, inclusive, safe workspace for both male, for both male and females, as well as the third gender. And when we are trying to do that, we know, like renewable energy sector is still a little better than the other sectors. We have some 32% of the workforce as women workforce, but 32%, if we dissect the number, we'll see most of the women are coming from the administrative part of it, not the technical or the technological, innovation aspect, but from the administrative aspect. So what should we do? We need to first accept. There has to be acceptance that women can also have knowledge and technical knowledge, and they can execute the technical knowledge as well. There has to be infrastructure to support women so that they can go out to the field and prove that we have knowledge, as professionals, and we can execute the knowledge at the field as well. Then there has to be systems in place to acknowledge, recognize, reward, promote such women at the field. And in order to do that, there will be two more important things. We need to build capacity, for all the women, urban women, when a woman like me who is working with a corporate, or women who are there at the rural setup, who are working in the field, trying to develop a crop which is green in nature. How we can help them? How we can help them understand that instead of a fossil fuel driven pump, they can go for a solar pump, and how they can operate a solar pump. So that is building capacity across geographies, across urban and rural setups. Then comes access to finance. It's very important that whatever we want to do, if I want to start a business tomorrow, I need finance. And there has to be equality. When I am applying for a loan as a woman, and when a man is applying for a loan, there should not be any distinction between the two. So how do we ensure all these things? So now, this is a very popular quote by the UN Secretary General. I'm sure we know, right? United Nations has the Sustainable Developmental Goals that we are all trying to achieve. But the Secretary General thinks that we cannot achieve any of our goals without the participation of women and girls. We need women and girls while developing a sustainable world. Now, I will share a story with you. I was talking about infrastructure, right? So, when I started my career with PwC in 2009, I remember I was traveling to from Tamil Nadu, from Chennai airport. I was traveling to somewhere near Tirupati, and it took about 3-4 hours. And there was no like female toilet in between. And then my work was at a factory. It was an iron ore factory where I was trying to help them understand, what is the possibility of energy reduction if they go for waste heat recovery in their kilns, and how much carbon emission reduction is possible through that. That was in 2009. So I went there, I took a early morning flight, and then I went there, and then I traveled, some 2-3 hours on the road, and I ended up at that factory. The factory didn't have any female employee there. So they didn't have a ladies' toilet as well. So forget about, gender neutral toilet that you see I've written, but there was, no setup at all. What I did, during lunchtime, I had to tell them that I need to use the washroom. And all the men there, they had a common toilet which didn't have a lock also. They all stood there, and I went and used the toilet, and they all stood there to guard me so that a third person cannot come in. But they ensured, I spent 3 days there, and that was the arrangement with my colleagues there at the factory. But they ensured, and they promised to me the next time when I would go back, there would be a toilet for a gender neutral toilet, and that happened. They built a toilet. So the industry was not ready for a woman to come in. So I was the first person who went there and did this. So this is the change that we need to make. If you're going somewhere, we need to be vocal about it. If there is no toilet, we need to talk, tell them that there is no toilet. Otherwise, whether it's a renewable energy sector or any other sector, we can't move in. Now, it's we need to keep in mind that when we talk about diversity, inclusion, all these words, we see that our colleagues, in many cases, they are trained, they understand, they empathize with each other. But it is not about our colleagues only. We need to train our clients when we are talking with our third parties. We need to train the cab drivers. So when a company like PwC is trying to tie up, or even ISWBM, if they are trying to tie up with cab vendors, we need to know that they also need to be trained about the whole aspect of gender safety for women and all, and also the cafeteria staff and so on. So we are actually trying to address a larger stakeholder when we are talking about gender inclusion. And when we are hiring, when we are hiring women or someone from the LGBTQ community, it should not be a CSR drive or a corporate social responsibility drive. No, you hire us because we have the knowledge, we have the intellect, and we'll be able to implement that in the field. That's why you should hire us, not because it's a social responsibility of yours. Like you do not hire men because for a social cause, so you should not hire women also for a social cause. That has to be ingrained in the policies. That's very important. And I have seen, in from my own experience, that as I'm growing senior, I'm losing my female colleagues because maybe they are kind of trying to raise their children there at home. They are becoming mothers and all. So how do we accept this, that women will be mothers and they will have additional responsibilities? Again, an example, I do attend a lot of international workshops as a part of my job responsibilities, and they accept, even if it is a UN conference and all, if my child is on my lap and if I do a video conference, they accept and appreciate that. So this is acceptance. They should know that a woman professional, even at a senior level, can have a child, and the child should be there with the mother. And that acceptance is very, very important for all of us to note if you're talking about inclusion. And it's not only about women; it's also about men, because I've seen that while maternity leaves are a very usual thing for us. Whoever is trying to get that leave. But for similarly for fathers, paternity leaves are not that celebrated, but it should be, right? Because household work is not only for women, it's also for men. So maternity leaves, paternity leaves should have equal focus. Otherwise, we can't come out of that notion that, the household code is only for mothers, so maternity leaves are needed, paternity leaves are not. What are the changes that we are trying to make in our organization? Yes, we are talking more about diversity and inclusion. In the last, a few years, especially in the last year, we have seen that we are having several workshops, once in a month at least, on diversity and inclusion. There is a dedicated diversity and inclusion team who shares every now and then insights on the subject, which is also a very important thing. You keep on hearing, you keep on learning things. We all, we can't know everything at one go. So we keep on learning, and all these regular communications actually help. And then, same gender partner, that is getting recognized in our group medical policy, a very, very important step to make. Flexible work hours, of course, that's always there. And especially when women who are like rated 1 or rated 2 are like achievers in their own space, their ratings actually are retained. Even if they go on maternity leave, their ratings are retained, which is again a very, very important step. That you can't penalize someone if someone is going on maternity leave. Then there are inclusion champions. We need to ensure that during promotions and appraisals, salary hikes and all, there should not be any gender bias there. So that's why what we have done is there are inclusion champions, all women. I am also one of the inclusion champions in my organization. So we are present there during the moderation discussions to ensure that the appraisal and promotions, when we take decisions, there is no bias around it. And hence, as I was talking to you, that we need to educate all our stakeholders, our colleagues. We need to, on Women's Day, I mean, if we receive an acknowledgement from our men colleague that, that yes, you are adding value, that means a lot, right? So it's important that we formalize the system. We formalize the acknowledgement process, as a part of our policy. We also need to kind of ensure that our clients, when we do all these workshops, we include everyone. We try to hear out from them also how they can ensure that when our women colleagues are traveling, how safe their workplaces will be. It's not only our workplace, all the field level activities, those workplaces also need to be safe. That assurance should come from the clients. Others in the value chain I talked about, whether it's the housekeeping staff or the cafeteria staff, cab agencies or other contractors, all need to be educated, need to be aware of gender safety, gender equality. And this has to be a formal inclusion in it should affect our payroll. If a manager who is trying to champion their the women colleagues, that particular manager should be rewarded more than another manager who is not encouraging such diversity and inclusion. That distinction has to be there. Otherwise, no one we will talk about it, but it will not get implemented. Now that is about workplace. I'll talk a little bit about the kind of work that I do, and as Professor Sengupta was mentioning that. I'm working in Jharkhand as a part of a national adaptation fund for a climate change project. It's a fund situated by NABARD. So, some of those examples I share here with you. So, how do we kind of ensure that there is an entry point for women into all kinds of climate resilience programs? First of all, we need to hear all the voices. We need to hear their voices. When we talk, when we go and interact with the community, if it is a common community where both men and women are present, then usually women do not talk. Their voices are kind of subsumed by the voices of the men. So it's very important that we have female-only, male-only focus group discussions so that female voices are also heard. They can talk freely without any fear. And that is one of the observations that we have found, that it's very important to do female-only FGDs rather than a combined heterogeneous focus group. Now coming to the fact that once we identify the issues from these female-only focus groups, it's important that we build their capacity. And how do we build their capacity and where should we build their capacity? We should ensure, first of all, that whatever capacity building activity we are doing, and this is mainly for the rural workforce that we have. When we are trying to do that, we should ensure that there is at least 30%. It should be more, but at least 30% female participation in all the capacity building workshops. It should be a conscious effort. There should be a conscious effort that we should have at least 30% female participation. And what do we teach them about? We teach them about mainly two things. One is financial literacy, how to create a bank account, how to do a bank transfer, how to ensure, because we know, right, that women in our country do not have land holding capacity in most cases. And we are not asset owners. Mostly men are asset owners. So how do we make them aware that they are not the asset owners? They need to own assets. They need to own land. That awareness is also not there. Once the awareness is there, they will be vocal about it. Then is technical literacy. They should know when we are trying to distribute the mini solar grids for rural electrification and use of renewable energy, They need to know how to repair a solar panel. They need to know how to operate a solar pump. If the pump doesn't work, how to repair a pump. That technical literacy also needs to be there in them. How to use biomanure, how to replace chemical fertilizers with bio fertilizers, how to use multi-grain pulverizers, because that's a very important thing for the rural livelihood. How to use them, they need to know. Different kinds of handicrafts, that a woman can do and can become an entrepreneur. The next point. Entrepreneurship is very important, but they can't do it alone. So that's why it's important that we create self-help groups so that they can run some of these off-farm activities, means the activities that are not happening in the field, that are happening off the field. And we train them, then they learn, then they run it on their own as one group of women. And when they do it, we need to link them to the market so that they can sell them. And they can earn out of it. So that market linkage is also very important. And any climate resilience program should focus on this aspect as well. And then comes equal participation. We talk about equal participation, but how do we do it? If we want to do it, then there has to be a structural rearrangement of the small rural units that are there. For example, the farmer producer groups. We need to structurally rearrange that so that women actually have a space there, a decision-making space there in those farmer groups. Similarly, there are joint forest management and agricultural management committees. They are also, when we entered Jharkhand, these committees do not have any women participation. Now women are there, they're leading it, they're executing all the activities that are listed as a part of their job description. So that structural rearrangement has to happen. And then you allocate equal responsibilities in terms of execution and decision making. If we can do all these things parallelly and together, then there is a possibility that we will be able to achieve gender mainstreaming in climate programs as well. So I'll stop here. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.